I've made videos in these topic threads behind me, which you can skip around. For more on our story, you can watch the video on our background. This video is in the thread on coping. This is part B of more detail on the list of coping strategies, which I first described in the coping overview video and covered portions of in part A. Here's the outline again of the two-part video on this topic. In this part B, I'm going to describe some avoidant coping strategies, some conversion coping mechanisms, and some attack and self-harm strategies. As mentioned, it seems that having a broad range of these skills and flexing between them is something that helps to process traumatic news and events. The next section of the video is from the avoidance category. Some of these are obvious: denying there's a problem, compartmentalizing a problem so that you're always focusing time and attention on other things, or using physical distancing like leaving the country. But there's one called reaction formation which is harder to figure out, so I'll just briefly explain. This is forming a strongly negative or denying response to something that you worry about yourself. So you might worry that you'll break down under stress, but then you form your life around acting like it doesn't bother you or worry you one bit, and that you're totally strong and totally fine. Avoidant coping mechanisms are not a bad thing to do some of the time, because there are times when you need to be functional. But, like all of these things, relying on any one strategy exclusively seems to be not as good as moving around and through them. It kind of makes sense. If you're rebuilding a house, you don't want to focus on one single part of the structure. You don't want to make the plumbing gold-plated and perfect but have no roof. Instead, you want to do a little bit in all aspects of building a home and shelter, and working here and there, making progress in each. It's a similar thing in rebuilding your view of life, which might be challenged by the stressful news. In this next section, I'll talk a little about conversion coping strategies, just to give a feel for what they are. Some conversion strategies are fairly common, like religious ones. You might use your spiritual or religious beliefs to convert the factual situation into a symbolic or spiritual test for you to pass. Your God has a plan and is giving you a problem, or giving you a lesson that they intend you to learn from. I can't say that might be the case, but it's an example of converting the basic facts into another framework, and one that might help you engage and cope. Altruism and displacement are two other strategies that can be conversion techniques. Altruism is a good thing, using your resources to assist other people, whether that's time, money, or emotional energy. If you're impacted by stress and one way you deal with it is to help others who are going through the stress, that can be a good thing. As I mentioned elsewhere, being able to do something to help make a situation right can give you a sense of having some control and safety. That's not a bad way to cope, as long as you're not only focusing on other people and giving away all your resources. Displacement is another form of conversion, but isn't always so good. Displacement is taking the feelings you have in one situation and acting them out in a separate, different situation. Like the classic example where your boss yells at you, but you don't respond at work, you go home and yell at your family or your dog. It can also be more pleasant, like if you're stressed that you've done something wrong, but avoid thinking about that stress and act very politely with the clerk at the supermarket checkout. That's not a bad thing, it's just that you're not coping directly with the stressful situation. Instead, you are exporting your feelings and converting them into actions in other unrelated situations. It's understandable sometimes, if you can also flex out of it, moving into other strategies as well. In this last section, I'll quickly mention a few strategies from the categories of attack and self-harm. They don't sound so pleasant, but if I think about them, I can remember instances where they came pretty naturally as responses to stress, both for me and for others. Some of the attack strategies, like blaming others or focusing on the wrong, can have some positive purpose. You might be able to learn from mistakes made and avoid them in the future. But when it comes to, say, a doctor's misdiagnosis that happened months ago, it's water under the bridge that you won't cross again, and sometimes has more to do with your wanting to feel like the world can be controlled. Remember, after all, that your doctor didn't cause the problem. That's something that is out of their control. Posse building is an approach that focuses on strength and safety in numbers. You might deal with stress by telling other people and getting them upset and ready to fight alongside of you. It's not a bad thing sometimes, but in other instances, there isn't really anyone or anything to go fight. It's just that a combination of circumstances has put you in the place of dealing with stressful events. It's very common to phrase things as fighting or battling, but it's just one way of thinking of things. For example, in the case of cancer, it's your own cells that are just dividing and multiplying, instead of the more mysterious balance of growing only to a certain point and then stopping there. So are you fighting your own cells? Or is that just a coping perspective to label an external enemy named cancer? Gathering your community into teams to help you is something I'm a fan of, so build those posses. But posse building can also be a negative if you're telling people one side of the story and framing some scapegoats for everyone to be mad at. It's natural to do, but you might want to move on from it. Finally, a couple of self-harm coping strategies. Risk-taking can involve drugs and alcohol, or fast friends, or fast driving. Taking risks can be a way to tell ourselves that we're fearless, or that we can overcome our fears, or that we're too strong to care about stress and our worries. The other mechanism to mention is somatization, which means to translate stress into bodily feelings. It's not something we intend to do very much, but when under stress you might notice headaches, upset stomachs, sore back muscles, chronic fatigue, and other things. Because it's not something you're trying to do, it's hard to control it, but I think it can be good to be aware of as a coping mechanism / stress indicator. Pain in your body might be a sign that stress is difficult for you, and you can both look to relax your physical pain as well as examine the stress and other coping mechanisms you might consciously want to use to deal with it. I'm going to stop here and point to the whole table once again. I hope that these brief explanations help give you some feel for the concepts, and that seeing them all in one place helps reinforce the findings from research that resilience and recovery from traumatic events isn't one path or one recipe. It's using a lot of different coping mechanisms, switching as needed, and avoiding getting stuck on one. See you in another video.